Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today I will be going over the worst books that I have read according to Goodreads. So I just filmed my best books that I've read according to Goodreads video, and that was just all over the place because there were so many books by the same author. So I tried to do like groupings and then have 20 items on the list, if that makes any sense. So hopefully the video didn't hurt your brain too much. This one should be a lot more simple because I don't have to do any groupings. I have multiple authors to talk about. So other than that, same idea as last time. I'm not including nonfiction, I think, at all. And I'm also excluding books with less than 100 ratings, just for fairness and everything. So I do want to quickly say, I'm sorry. I apologize if any of these books are books that you love and I didn't love and I sound mean or whatever the case may be. I may not be so nice to some of these books, and I just want to say sorry before I start because I can get a little mean if I didn't like the book. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. The first book is Postern of Fate, and this is the lowest rated book, and it was terrible. It was so bad. It was so bad. This has an average of 3.2, and I have to say this is probably one of Agatha Christie's worst that I have read so far. This I gave 1 star. There was no plot. The characters, Tommy and Tuppence, they are older. They are, I think, if not middle-aged, they might be even older, but their characterization is just odd. And again, no plot. The mystery I felt nothing. Like this was pretty bad. So that's the first book. The next book has an average of 3.28, and that is The Imperial Wife by Irina Rain. And this book I also gave 1 star. It was, oh my gosh. I remember when I read it and I was so sure I would love it because I was really getting into different types of historical fiction set in different eras, not just World War II. And I picked it up because I was really intrigued by the cover. And when I heard that it takes place in Russia, and I was so hopeful for this book, and it was just so bad. Like the writing was so dry and bland, and the characters, like if an author does a good job of describing a character, I'm pretty good at picturing them in my head and their mannerisms and their personality. These characters, they had as much personality as a cardboard box. And I don't know what it was about certain scenes. I don't remember there being anything smutty, but there were just some scenes that made me so uncomfortable. And yeah, this book, it wasn't good. Next up, we have The Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen, which I just read for Jane Austen July, and this has an average of 3.34. And I do understand that one. I do understand why not as many people like it. Some of the stories in this little collection are very odd. I did give it, I think, a 2.75, and I enjoyed a couple out of the 5 or 6 I think there were in here. And they are Jane Austen's juvenilia. They're not meant to be taken seriously, so I understand it's not for everyone, but this is another very low rated one. So next we have Murder at the Flamingo, and I gave this 3 stars when I read it. It's set during the 1920s, so you get like the Roaring Twenties, the flappers and everything. This is an average of 3.39. And I do think that one of this book's major weaknesses was its setting. There were some things that made it feel like it was set in the modern day rather than in the 1920s. And then also the characterization, it wasn't great. And also the mystery didn't surprise me at all. So this one I gave 3 stars. And honestly, if I had read it now, I would probably give it 2 stars. I used to be a lot more lax with ratings. Back in the day, I would give any book 5 stars that I even remotely liked. So 3 stars isn't technically a reflection of how I would feel about the book now. Then we have another book that I just recently read, and that is The Mysteries of Udolpho. This has an average of 3.39. And this is another one of those that I completely understand why people would rate it very low. It is so slow. It is so slow moving. This book has like the weirdest plot lulls, you could call them. So it's plot, things are happening, and then nothing. just traveling. And honestly, it got to a point where I'm like, if I see the word Pyrenees Mountains one more time, I'm gonna chuck this book out the window because it's annoying. So I understand. I gave it a 2.75 because there were parts that I liked. I was invested enough to continue, and I was also buddy reading it. So the buddy reading experience elevated my overall experience with the book. But I understand why it's rated so low. It's very, very slow moving. It's from the late 18th century, not so much editing going on apparently, but yeah, it is what it is with this one. Then we have a short story by Robert Louis Stevenson. He wrote Jekyll and Hyde, which is very, very popular and one of my favorite, like, I guess, spookier stories. And so this one is called The Body Snatcher, and it has an average of 3.4. And this one I also gave 2 stars. I just was not impressed. Was not impressed with it. So this one's just not great. We have another one by Robert Louis Stevenson, which with an average of 3.44. And surprisingly, I gave this one 5 stars. This is one of those stories that I think I just read it at the right time in the right atmosphere, and it was perfect for that moment. Maybe I wouldn't give it 5 stars now, but I thought it was pretty interesting, pretty gothic, pretty creepy, but I liked it. Then we have a translated book, and it is a mystery book in a series called Louise Rick. And the book itself is called The Silent Women, or Call Me Princess. There are 2 different titles for it. And it is translated from Danish. And I think the issue with this book was the translation. I think it was so poorly done. It was one of those writing styles where it's like a robot was narrating. That's how it felt reading this book. I literally felt like a robot was reading this book to me. It was just awful. Bland. I gave it 1 star. Hated this book so much. Then we have a Dickens short story, which is The Cricket on the Hearth, with an average of 3.45. And this one I gave 3 stars, I think, 2.75 to 3. And I just didn't connect to it. It was okay. It was kind of cute at times, but just in general, I don't know. I didn't really feel a connection to it. It wasn't as impactful as A Christmas Carol. So this one, I get why a lot of people don't like it. And then we have Hard Times by Dickens, and this one has an average of 3.54. This one I gave 3 stars to. I find that I really like Dickens' writing style. Like, it just, from the few books that I've read by him, even though they're dense and it takes me a while to get into them and like to get invested in the story, and I feel like Spark Notes sometimes needs to come in clutch because sometimes I'm confused as to what's happening. But this book, I went in with very low expectations. I saw the average rating before I read it, and so I kind of like braced myself. And while I do think that it's a weaker novel and like I didn't connect to the characters, I found the plot intriguing enough that I wanted to know what was going to happen. 3 stars. Maybe if I reread it, I would, you know, possibly rate it lower, possibly rate it higher. It really depends also on the mood that I'm in. And then we have Powder and Patch by Georgette Hare with an average of 3.56. I read this recently. What did I give it? 3 stars? 2.5? 3? I think I gave it 3 stars just because I was so amused during the reading experience. Like, it wasn't a great story and the characters weren't all the nicest of characters, but it was just so amusing. Like, it was just pure enjoyment and fun. So this one, I understand why people don't like it, but I personally thought it was hilarious. We have another Agatha Christie. We have The Big Four with an average of 3.59. And this one I gave 3 stars. I think this is another case where I read it at the right time. It's more adventurous than mysterious and less of a whodunit and more of like international intrigue and like the secret organization type of thing. And it was a shorter book as well, but it just didn't have that charm that a lot of her whodunits have. But it was still fun. I did give it 3 stars. Next, we have a book that I read many years ago, and when I picked it up, I thought that I would absolutely love it because it has a word in the title that always draws my attention. It is The Midwife of Venice by Roberta Rich, and it is not Venice that drew my eyes, it is midwife. I have always been interested in midwifery. If I wasn't becoming a nurse, I would have become a midwife. So books with that in the title, I'm always drawn to. And this one is set in medieval Venice, and it has a Jewish midwife at the heart of the story, but the issue I had with this book is the choices that the main character makes. There are just situations where I'm like, how did you get yourself in this situation? Like, how? It didn't make sense. A lot of this book didn't make sense. So I think when I read it, I gave it 3 stars, but I probably would have rated it lower if I read it now. Then we have The Last Houseguest by Megan Miranda, and I gave it 2 stars. This has an average of 3.61. And I remember reading it, and that's it. I don't remember anything about this book. I gave it 2 stars. Apparently I didn't like it. Then we have one that was so hyped when it first came out, and so many people were giving it 5 stars, like just 5 star after 5 star. And I was so confused because when I read it, I was like, how? And I do apologize if this is a book you gave 5 stars and loved, but it did not do it for me. And that is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. This has an average of 3.63. With more people reading this book, the average has gone down. And I've noticed that from when it first came out until now, the average has really, really decreased. I was expecting like an overflow of gothic, dark academia, and like Greek myth vibes. And there were some of those elements there, but it was just very lightly explained and, you know, presented. I didn't like the main character. She made some very odd choices. I guessed the ending of the mystery, and the writing wasn't the best. So I was just looking at my Goodreads review, and apparently I said that I'm giving it 3 stars, but I only gave it 2 stars. I don't know, because the farther I get away from this book, the less I like it. I enjoyed parts of the reading experience, but it just wasn't as great as I was expecting. Then we have a book with an average rating that hurts my heart because I loved it. We have Lady Susan by Jane Austen, and this has an average of 3.64, and I gave it 5 stars. I get it. Lady Susan sucks. She is a terrible, terrible human being. And if you don't want to read a book with a terrible protagonist, she's not even a protagonist. I mean, she is a protagonist, but she sucks. She's not a great person. If you don't want to read that kind of story, yeah, you won't like this book because it's about her flirting with men, even married men. She's terrible. She's a terrible mother. She could not care less about her daughter and just wants money and wants to flirt with people and feel like she has control. I get it. But it hurts because I loved this book. It's all letters, and it's such a fun way to tell a story. I really, really loved it. We have another Agatha Christie. We have Elephants Can Remember, and I read this back in May, and I gave it 2 stars. It is not one of her best, that is for sure. The thing is, the mystery wasn't bad in this one, but what really like jarred me was Poirot. He was not Poirot. It's like he was a completely different person. From what I understand, Agatha Christie was much older when she wrote this book and may have been showing signs of cognitive decline. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but all in all, it just was not a great book by her. So I gave it 2 stars. It has an average of 3.66. Next, we have a cute little contemporary that I gave 3 stars to. I overall fairly enjoyed it, and that is Jane in Love by Rachel Givney, and this also has an average of 3.66. And this one is a really interesting take on Jane Austen. It's basically Jane Austen time traveling to the modern day. It's interesting, and it was an interesting look at what her reaction could have been to the modern day. But from what I remember, I think that if she decides to stay in the modern day, her works will be lost from history and like people won't know about her. So she's like, that's like the main conflict of the story, is her trying to decide what to do. It was cute. I gave it 3 stars. I wasn't like completely blown away, but it was a sweet book for sure. Then we have the first book that I have ever read by George Eliot, and I'm so sad to say that it was not a hit. I still have very high hopes for her other books because this one does have a lower average rating than her other books. So this one has an average of 3.66. It is Silas Marner, and I gave it 2 stars. I did not enjoy it. I didn't hate it, but I just wasn't invested at all in the story. And then at number 20, our last book, we have Shipped by Angie Hockman. And this one, I am still surprised at how much I enjoyed it. I think because I am still not huge on contemporary, and I remember when I read it, I was like, you know what? I'm just in the mood for something very summery, and I don't really like contemporary, but who cares? Let's just go for it. And so I picked it up on a whim, and it's set in the Galapagos Islands, so you really get those summery vibes, and I just had such a good time. It is so, so fun. It has an average of 3.67, but I gave it 4 stars. I just think it was what I needed at that time, and it lived up to my expectations, so really, really enjoyed this one. I'm glad that I could end this video on a more positive note because some of these books I really did not like, but I didn't agree with all of the ratings, so there's that. But that is it for this video. If you have stuck around to the end, thank you so, so much. And I am just very appreciative of all of you guys for watching my videos. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you all in my next one. Bye!